Everybody, or I guess it's this afternoon, and happy snow day. I was wondering this morning if we were driving in, if this would have been a snow day or not. But I guess seeing as you're all sitting in your rooms or your offices, I guess that's a moot point, isn't it? Thank you so much for joining us again on day two of our work in mental health for business leaders and the workplace at the Center of Entrepreneurship. I'm hoping very much that you enjoyed our sessions yesterday. I know I learned a ton. Both for my own mental well-being. I shared it with my family last night as a bit of a checklist as well. And so, Jill and Nick, I really appreciate the input that you gave all of us yesterday. Today, I'd like to turn the focus a lot to the employee and actually in the workplace as far as some of the slides that I'd like to present. And then what I'll do is I'll turn it over to Jill and Nick to talk more on mental health. As far as an agenda goes today, I'm going to take 3 or 4 minutes to talk about mental health in the workplace and its impact both on the employees as well as on the business. I can't wait to turn it over then to Nick and Jill. And at the end of our session, we will be opening up for questions and discussions. I know yesterday quite a few emailed me and then also listed on the chat session. So please feel free to do both of those. So we'll get started. So, I'm not at all a mental health expert. As I told you all yesterday, I was impacted by it. I still am. But as a business owner and a business leader, I also saw the impacts of this towards what was happening in our business. And one of the things that I saw were really two aspects. Number one, the impact on the employee, and number two, the impact on the actual bottom line of the business. And one of the things I discovered very quickly is it's a very vicious circle. When you have an environment that does suffer with any sort of poison environment, whether it be work relationships, whether it be a work issue, mental health, you do see the issues as far as how the impact on the employee as well as the business. It's also a very hard one for you to break out of. So one of the things I've done here is I'm giving you 6 areas that I know I experienced impacted employee performance and mental health. The first one was leadership. We talked a lot about this yesterday, about the fact that, if I lead a business and I'm not well, this is something that always will filter down. There's something I read by a leadership man named John Maxwell, and he said, the higher up an organization you go, the more pressure you feel to cause an impact, but the less of the impact you actually have on the organization, and the less you actually know about what's going on in the workplace. And this is something for business leaders that we really struggle with. We really struggle to have a really accurate indication of what exactly is going on within the workplace. Sometimes by the time a business leader finds out that we have a sick workplace, sometimes it's too late. And as I said yesterday, leadership is one of the biggest acting jobs you're ever going to have in a business. Sometimes if you're not well, you try and pretend so much to be well that you're not in the end. And if you don't know if the next day is going to be very strong for you and the employees don't, that's a pretty obvious thing within a business. We talked yesterday about COVID, about the fact that COVID has exacerbated mental health issues in the workplace. A lot of my friends who are still entrepreneurs, they don't know what's going to happen next week. They don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but they also are trying just as hard, if not harder, to portray a positive message to their employees as well. Next is employee attendance. In one of my former jobs, we had 519 employees, and we were downtown Toronto, and during one of our recessions in 2008 and 2009, we really started to see a big increase in attendance problems in certain departments. We tracked that back to the fact that we had people there that just weren't well. Physically, they weren't well. Mentally, they weren't well. And their leader, by the way, was also not very well. So what happened is we started to see a lot of issues with our attendance. We then saw a lot of what we called workforce attrition. That simply means people leaving. 80% of people leave their jobs in Canada right now because of their boss. And if their boss isn't well, they start to look for other opportunities. If someone feels that they're going to work every day and they're not mentally in the right spot, they start to look for other opportunities as well. So one of the biggest signs that we saw within our stores was, did we have employee attrition? And when we did, we really tried to track that back to the whys, and often we saw issues with mental health. My regret, everybody, is that I wish I would have known that earlier, because I wish we could have come in there earlier and gone and said, let's do something, much like mental health first aid program that we're going to talk about on Friday. We also saw an increase in employee leaves. A lot of our employment laws are very helpful to employees. So if they do have stress, whether it be mental, physical injuries, we do have a lot of assistance available to them. We saw a lot of people that would leave on mental health leave, on stress leave in certain departments. We then were able to go and do some work a little bit on why that was. We also found a lot of issues with employees who are having problems at home. Maybe they were having marital issues. Maybe they're having issues with their children. Maybe they're having issues paying their bills. We saw that our workplace sometimes would contribute to that by not providing a workplace that was healthy enough for them to go and flourish and work. And the last topic, I think, is something that not often is spoken about. When people decide to leave, companies don't do a very good job at what we call building a bench. So building a bench meaning if someone leaves today, we know that we have someone that we're grooming to take that spot. Often when people would leave suddenly because of issues in the workplace, we would go into what's called crisis hiring mode. So we're hiring someone urgently because we need someone. My experience can tell you that you almost never get the best person when you're in a crisis hiring mode. And further that, you're almost always crisis hiring. So it becomes that perpetual vicious circle in many, many ways. And I'll talk really quickly and briefly here about the actual impact on the business. I mean, as an entrepreneur, you are in business to run a successful one. And I did see a lot of different impacts that a sick or a poisoned or a poor mental health environment would have. Number one, obviously, is performance. We had many stores that I could walk in there and I would know the work environment was a good one, and I would know the work environment was a positive one, and almost always it tracked back to positive performance. I've yet to see a store that does very, very well that doesn't have that I've yet to see a store that isn't doing very well that we also couldn't track back to employee performance, employee issues. When I stepped into a role, we had 11 stores in my last role as a business leader. I did a survey, an employee survey, and the very first response I got is, "Why are you doing this? Because nothing ever changes." And that's something that really stuck with me for a long time. If you're going to do a survey, you're going to find results about employees not being happy. You better make sure that you take action. And this is something that performance would always suffer as a result of people not being happy with their jobs or not being in the right spot physically or mentally. Energy levels. We used to see a lot of issues with energy levels with people who we know were struggling. We tried very hard to help them, but I know we've talked before yesterday about stigma, and we'll talk a little bit more about today, I assume. That was always a problem for us too. We also saw a ton of issues with customer service. If I don't feel like being at work, if I'm not mentally in the right headspace, how do I feel like portraying myself and doing very well to our customers? We're seeing a lot of this with COVID, aren't we? And a lot of times when you have interactions in the drive-through or what it might be, an environment where people are not very happy, an environment where people may not be well, is not one that a customer is going to be welcomed in, and that creates a great disconnect between the business and the customers there. One of the concepts that I learned about as I moved forward in business was something called a poison environment, and poison environments can happen in many, many different ways. Whether that be an employee relationship, whether that be a contentious issues between employees, whether it be the way that leadership in a business is not taking care of their employees. A poison environment can happen very quickly. A poison environment can have severe and long-term detrimental impacts to a business, and much like the ones I talked about of employees leaving, attrition, energy, motivation. This is something that we often would see. My learning as I've gotten older in my career is that we haven't tracked that to mental illness. We didn't track that to mental health. We went and looked for reasons elsewhere and not from that. And that's something that has been a great growth opportunity for me. And then when I talk about stigma, I mentioned yesterday in our session that I found a lot of this was generational in that a lot of mental health issues, if they're not met with open arms in the workplace, sometimes we can track that back to a generational problem with people that might not be as young, not greeting that as openly because it's something that they don't understand. I had many cases as a business leader where I had employees come to me who mentally weren't well, but their biggest concern wasn't how they were feeling. It was the fact they can't talk about it. They can't express it because when they did to employees on the floor in their workplace, it was met with a stigma. It was met with, "Oh, you just want time off." It was met with, "You'll get over it." And it wasn't taken very seriously. And I know, Nick, you and I have talked about that, and I know we'll talk further about this. But to me, the biggest concern that we have in our workplace right now is the fact that this is not greeted like it would be a broken arm or a workplace injury that we have right now. And so that stigma was only perpetuated as we went forward. And again, I'll stress before I turn over to Jill and Nick, these are vicious circles in the workplace. They're not easily corrected. They're not easily fixed, but they do keep happening if a business owner, if a business leader does not take immediate action on that. So with that, I will turn this over to Jill today. And again, any questions you might have, please make sure you send them via email or via the chat. And I'm excited to answer them at the end of our session.
Thank you, Ryan. Hello, everybody. So I'm just going to wait. We're going to pull up our PowerPoint. I'm going to start, and I'm going to be turning it over to Nick today. So I work for the Canadian Mental Health Association in Hamilton, and part of my role as mental health promotion and resiliency facilitator is actually working with businesses, business owners, managers, supervisors, and staff about the importance of understanding and how to support your staff's mental health. So it's really important that we understand, again, what is mental health. So mental health is something that affects absolutely each and every one of us. The way we like to look at it is, if you have a brain, you have mental health. Just like you have a body, you have physical health. And it's important to really kind of focus on that and let people know that it is something that everybody experiences. And when we talk about things like positive mental health or positive well-being, what we're focusing on is kind of figuring out for yourself those things that are working really well in your life. And it's interesting, especially in a work environment, that we really do try and separate physical and mental health, and we really can't. But we've tried for centuries, and it's important to recognize that your brain controls your entire body, so your mental and physical health will always be intertwined. So sometimes we hear about this is, why is, if you're a supervisor or manager, why is your staff afraid to have a conversation with you? And a lot of this is kind of that stigma piece that we talked about yesterday, and not understanding too what some of the policies and procedures are in your organization. And that's a lot of what work that I do as well, is working with organizations so that they can help to clarify some of those things. And these are just some of the questions that come up. So you're going to see a few here. So work thinks that I have a back problem because my panic sometimes becomes too much and I have to stay home. But the person isn't calling in to say that they're having a problem with their mental health. They're talking about their back pain. Here's another one. I have anxiety, but I think people see it as a cop-out, or it's just a made-up excuse. So everybody gets anxious from time to time, right? But instead, I told work I had a migraine. And this is not uncommon. And what's really interesting when we talk about, and you're going to see some of these slides, is that when we call in to work to say that we're sick, we tend to go into great detail. You know, I've been sick for hours, or I have a really bad headache. We tend to think we need to justify that we're ill, and we actually don't. Employers are not actually even entitled to any information as to why you might be often ill, but we often provide that because we think it's necessary. And what we need to recognize is that it's okay to talk about some of these things that are going on that might not be necessarily physical in nature to start with. So that fear of your reputation changing. And again, I found it easier to say I had a migraine rather than saying I couldn't stop crying today. So until organizations and companies and businesses start to recognize this, these things are still going to progress. And we hear a lot around Bell Let's Talk Day. A lot of the things that you're seeing, a lot of the commercials are really focuses on this workplace mental health piece. And what's interesting too is that we know 1 in 4 people will experience a mental illness in a year. We know that number is probably closer to 1 in 3. But what we also know is that 2/3 of people actually suffer in silence because of that fear of rejection, judgment, and even potentially job loss. So here are some mental health in the workplace stats, and I find these kind of interesting. Only 36% of people in Canada say if they were experiencing a mental health problem that they would even go talk to their supervisor. So that means that way more than the majority wouldn't, right? Wouldn't even think about going to have that conversation with somebody at work. We also know that 500,000 people miss work every week in Canada for mental health reasons. It is one of the leading reasons people are on short-term disability in our country. But what businesses fail to understand is if managed properly, and actually a reintegration program is put in place, or we actually start looking at what sick time can include, which should be including mental health is that it can actually save a company money before it comes a long-term disability claim. And it's sad that we have to put it in those terms, but when we think about business, business is about that. It's about making money. So we really have to look at return on investment when we're talking to people often in the business field, because we know that that's a piece of the puzzle. And it really is a better return on a company's investment if they look after somebody's mental health. For example, think of it like this. Imagine that somebody goes off because they're unwell, they're on short-term disability, and you are trying to fill that position. And it may take you 3 to 4 months to fill that position and get that person trained to the level, maybe even 6, depending on the type of job that they have, up to 6 months to get that person trained to actually be in a position to take over from the person who went off. Instead of maybe working with the individual who is off to find ways that the person is better at to come back to work, even if it is in an accommodation capacity. So how does stress affect it? Well, stress is really interesting because stress refers to the potentially negative and positive experiences that we have. But when we think of stress, we always think of negative, but it can come from both good and bad experiences. And it's our body's reaction. What's really interesting is our body responds to stress and excitement pretty much the same way. It's our brain that actually decides whether this is something good or something bad. But stress can be about actually increased productivity or engagement. So take a look a little bit at this graph, and it kind of gives you an idea of what can happen when we're achieving peak performance and where our stress levels can be, and what can happen actually to the formation of disease. And you see the terms sick and healthy and disease. And what we're talking about is when we don't look after ourselves, they are actually interconnected. So think about yourself. We know that things like absentee and presenteeism actually occur when people aren't feeling well. And what do we mean by that? Absenteeism is when actually people don't show up for work. And presenteeism is when actually people come to work, but they shouldn't be there because they're not feeling well enough to do their job. And that actually puts a strain on the entire level of employees, managers, and it really can cause exhaustion and even panic and anxiety, okay, to other levels of the company. So it's really something that needs to be addressed right at the beginning when we're looking kind of at that bottom level. So what are some stress overload warning signs? And these are really important because we all hear that thing that we all experience stress, right? And we do. And you'll hear people say that they don't get stressed out. And some people don't, but that doesn't mean they're not experiencing stress, but they're able to manage it. So what are some stress overload warning signs? So these things are things like emotional. So increased worry about your health, or you might find increased agitation or irritability. And especially we're seeing this more and more with this pandemic, is that people are becoming much more short-tempered. Things that normally bother them, that don't bother them, or they can let roll off their back, are not happening. Cognitive problems. So this could be the inability to concentrate or poor judgment. I know for me, when I'm stressed, it's really hard to focus. And I often feel like I'm doing several things at once, but none really, really well. There's also some physical overload warning signs: headaches, stomach aches, dizziness, nausea, diarrhea, loss of sex drive, or increased energy levels. And all of these things can also have an effect on our behavior. A lot of what we're seeing with stress overload right now because of the pandemic is a lot of trouble with sleeping or sleeping patterns. So people are having a very hard time getting regulated. They're having trouble falling asleep. They may be sleeping too much. We're also seeing an increase in risky behavior. And that can be things like drug and alcohol use. And that can be using when they normally don't, or using more, okay? So there's all of these things can be happening. When we talk about overload, we're actually looking at these things on an ongoing basis. So what can we do in the workplace? How can we make things better in terms of our psychological health and safety? And there's actually a psychological health and safety standard that organizations need to follow. And there's 13 different components to that. And that would take us a long time to go into, but it is available online and you can find out what those are. And there are different courses in which you can take to learn more about them. But these are just a few support tips. One is to have a plan. So let employees know that you are thinking ahead and that you're looking ahead and that you're going to keep employees well informed. What happens when we don't keep employees well informed is that's when the rumor mill starts. That's also when lack of education and information breeds fear. So it's really good to discuss with your employees what are some of your main concerns. And a lot of them center right now around, what if I get sick? What if a family member gets sick? How do I take time off work? What's that going to look like? If you can compile these frequently asked questions, and then you can compile answers for them, you can direct employees to them on a regular basis. It's also really good to let your employees know that you know things are going to be different and that our work is definitely being impacted. My work is definitely not the same. In some ways, I'm busier than I ever was before, but in other ways, I'm doing things completely differently. So there's definitely a learning curve. And as employers or managers or supervisors, we need to let people know that we have to allow some time for that to happen. We have to allow our expectations to shift. And we have to allow people an opportunity to learn what it's going to look like. Because in places, jobs are completely different than they were before. And in other places, they're taking on absolutely a whole bunch of new responsibilities. What other things are really important when we're thinking about communication is worry, like I said, worry and fear grow in the absence of up-to-date information. So let your employees know how they will hear from you. Is it going to be a monthly newsletter? Is it going to be a regular weekly email? And the other thing is communicate with your staff even when things aren't changing. So, hey, just wanted to check in, let you know that we're pretty much status quo here. Even letting people know any changes in the community or resources that you've come across. These are really important ways to communicate. And it's also really important that we let people know that there are resources and that it's okay to be anxious or stressed, but that as an organization, you want to help. And the more we start to do this, people really worry, especially business owners, employers, really worry that this would cause more people to come out and talk about their mental health. Well, it does, but it also allows us to normalize it, and that people are much more likely to come to work and do a good job when they feel respected and supported. So reminding our employees that it's okay to access resources. And if your work has an employee, an EAP program, which is an employee assistance program, letting them know how to access that, letting them know what their EAP program does. I know we are lucky enough that where I work, and I work for a mental health agency, but we have counseling, but we also have access to things like financial planning, daycare searching, all of those different types of things. So there's more to an EAP than just a counselor. So I'm actually going to stop talking and I'm going to flip this over to Nick now, and he's going to continue on.
Just waiting for my video to show up here and for my audio to turn on. So good afternoon, I think. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you again for sharing your lunch hour with us. So in the next, I don't know, 10-ish slides or whatever it is, there's going to be a ton of information. So I'm not going to be reading through it because it's it'll be more the take-home message in the summary that I'm going to share with you, and from the perspective of what can you do, right? And Jill did a really, really great job kind of outlining some of the different considerations and circumstances and just overall what you need to think about as whether you're a business leader or an employee, what you need to think about in the workplace when it comes to emotional health, and how that could obviously impact your business. And, there's so many different things you can do, right? And I think the difficult part, and one of the things I find I constantly say is, there's no recipe, right? There's no instruction guide. There's no manual that's going to tell you how to manage all of these situations properly and effectively. And a lot of times, you have to rely less on your experience, because your experience is often going to lead you to judgment and lead you to deal with circumstances in a way that maybe you have in the past that just may not be appropriate for the current situation or circumstance you're dealing with. And I think one of the key things that we need to remember as, employees or employers or managers or whatever the position might be, is that the people's emotional health is fluid, and it's constantly changing and it's evolving. And, we can constantly be talking about the pandemic and how it's impacting our emotional wellness, and it absolutely and obviously is, and how our jobs are changing as a result of it. I'm very fortunate that I've been able to keep my job and through the pandemic, which has created that certainty of financial stability. But as Jill mentioned, my job is entirely different. In fact, and I'm busier now than I've ever been, for a variety of reasons. The workload is incredibly, I don't even know how to explain it. It's exponentially greater for whatever reason that might be. But in addition to that, I mean, the stress and the uncertainty that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis is obviously making every task a little more difficult. And as a business owner, leader, manager, employee, employer, fellow employee, some of the things that we have to do, not even that we have to do, that we should be doing, are more along the lines of looking out for each other and taking care of each other in certain, to put it best. So if you're finding that maybe your colleague or your employee, maybe is underperforming or maybe is showing up late for things, or maybe is not as engaged as they used to be, or, maybe they're a little more on edge than they used to be, or maybe they have completely lost all drive and passion and ambition for whatever the job might be. Those are some warning signs that we should be looking for to say, well, hold on, something's going on here. And we want to take, maybe a mental note of that, and not necessarily, document everything that's going on, but perhaps taking that mental note and saying, something might be going on here. And before we pass that judgment, because I know as well as you, and being in a workplace, we're constantly, we're judging. I mean, we are judging. We're judging performance. We're judging actions. We're judging, the words people are using. We're judging how we interact with people and how people interact with us. And we're constantly almost on edge a little bit, especially given the circumstances of, well, why are they acting that way? Why is this happening to me and not somebody else? And, why do they get to do that and I don't get to do that? Or any situation like that. It's almost like an entitlement, right? But we have to constantly remind ourselves that, well, we don't know the circumstances that person is in or are operating under. We don't know what they have to go home to. We don't know what they just came from. We don't know if they're caring for, a relative, or maybe they're just, their isolation circumstances are different and more challenging than ours in some way. So when we're noticing that people might not be the same, or what we might consider normal, we have to start to think about, okay, well, what can I do about it, right? So, or what should I do about it? Should I be ignoring it? Because that's the common way that we traditionally deal with these types of things, is we ignore it and pretend it's not there, because I don't want to bring attention to it because it might get worse, or they might get mad or something like that. So you have to kind of plan your approach. You have to plan the conversation. You have to plan for, to possibly have a difficult conversation. And that means, asking some questions. And it all starts with, when do we meet? Where do we meet? How do I bring the conversation up? How do I bring up the topic, right? And how long should I plan for? And these are the circumstances that you can't necessarily plan for. So having a plan of, well, we're going to meet for 30 minutes and get this all hammered out and figured out right away is not realistic, because 30 minutes could be, way too long of a time. Could be too much time, might not be enough time depending on the situation. So you can't plan for the way things are going to happen. You can't plan to have, an answer to all of the questions. You can't plan for the situation to be resolved. You kind of have to go into the situation expecting it to be fluid and constantly changing. And the best way to initiate that conversation is to simply just ask if they're okay. Ask them if things have been going okay, if there's anything going on or anything that they want to talk about. And oftentimes, myself included, and I think most people in here probably have an idea of my personal story, but for a number of years, I didn't share with anybody at work, my colleagues or my bosses, about what was going on in my, my personal life, my emotional health, because of that fear of judgment, that fear of well, people aren't going to look at me the same way. That fear that maybe, I'm not going to be given the same responsibilities or the same tasks, right? Or, I'm going to be less respected, and basically I'm going to be an employee because they have to keep me around, not because they want to keep me around type situation, right? So the most important piece of that or component of that is you can't ignore it, I guess is the objective of what I'm trying to get across, is that you can't ignore it. And to this day, even though I share my personal story with thousands of people almost a week, I still have colleagues and people that I work for that do ignore it, that ignore that side of it. And I know that when the people that are ignoring my passion of sharing about mental health and talking about mental health and mental illness, when people ignore that in turn creates even more stigma in the workplace, because by not acknowledging it, you're saying indirectly that it's not okay. You're saying that it's not okay to do what I do. You're not, by acknowledging it, you're saying this is something that we want to create more awareness about. By not acknowledging it, it's simply contributing to the stigma, and that's part of the problem, because with that comes that lack of confidentiality, that lack of trust, that lack of vulnerability, right? Because by you have somebody who is very open about their mental health, and we're not talking about that, then you're telling other people that are struggling in silence that they have to keep it quiet, because talking about it isn't going to get you any acknowledgement or isn't going to get you anything anyways. So it's almost like it's an interesting kind of dynamic around how do you create that inclusive conversation, that vulnerable conversation. How do you engage in that vulnerable conversation so that you can make more people comfortable stepping forward? Because ultimately what we want to do in the workplace is to make it okay to not be okay. And I'm going to say that again because it's kind of like a tongue twister, and I don't even know if I said it right. But the goal is to make it okay to not be okay. To make it okay to have bad days. To make it okay to, and using those sticky notes from the beginning of the presentation, to make it okay to cry, right? Yeah, well, it's unprofessional to cry at work. Well, maybe it is, right? Maybe it is. But is it unprofessional to close your office door for 10 minutes because you have to allow that emotion out and not be judged by the people around you, right? But to make it okay that, you're having a bad day, come to work. Maybe we can make it better. Maybe we can have a conversation about it that maybe might make you feel better. And that conversation might simply be me listening. And then maybe asking some questions to better understand what I can do to help. Not to understand how to fix it for you, but to better understand how I can help. And how do we do that, right? So first step is you have to create an open environment. And we teach a lot of these conversation skills in simple communication. It's almost like interviewing skills in a lot of ways, right? Because you want to sit with open body language. You want to sit with your arms uncrossed. You want to be leaning slightly forward, but you want to sit far enough away from somebody that they don't feel trapped. You want to give them access to the door or the window so they don't feel overwhelmed by that constant eye contact, or that you're chest to chest and they can't move, right? You want to give them that kind of that freedom, so to speak, that they could get up and walk away if they wanted to, and that you're not trying to intimidate them by leaning in over top of them, so you create that personal space. Eye contact is something that is extremely important, but it's also culturally specific, right? So certain cultures are not, it's not appropriate to make constant eye contact, and looking away is more a form of respect than making constant eye contact. So sometimes we have to be mindful of that as well. And if somebody is highly anxious, or somebody is actually experiencing a mental illness or a mental health problem, eye contact is going to be very challenging for them to do, because oftentimes their confidence is very low, their self-esteem is low, and eye contact is a sign of confidence, right? So looking away might be the only way that they can maintain their thought process. Looking away might be the only way that they can actually communicate effectively. And when we're building that kind of trust in that relationship, we want to give them time to talk. The more they talk, the better. And I teach people this all the time. If you want to develop rapport, if you want to develop trust, if you want to build a relationship, talk less, listen more, because that makes somebody feel valued. That makes somebody feel validated. That makes somebody feel important, right? And if you're truly trying to build that relationship where somebody can be vulnerable, you want them to feel valued. You want them to feel validated. You want to be trusted. So in order for you to be trusted, you have to make them feel important. And when you do that, you have to eliminate distractions, right? You have to eliminate, when I have somebody come into my office and I know it's about something that's probably maybe a little bit emotional, challenging for them to talk about, first thing I do is I make sure that my computer screens are off. So there's no distraction for them or me. My cell phone is flipped upside down and turned off on silent. So that way, if it rings or a notification comes in, it's not distracting, because you know as well as I do, when that phone lights up, the first thing you need to do is check to make sure it's not something important. My office phone, if I'm in my office, I actually turn the volume all the way down so nobody can reach me, because I don't want to be distracted. I want to give them my undivided attention, and I want to give them that respect, because that's what they deserve, right? And when I'm talking to that person, I'm showing that I care, right? And I remember the first time I said this, and I'm going to give you an example. I had a student come up to me after class one day, and essentially through the conversation, it came out that that person was considering suicide. They were talking about taking their own life. So we got into a long conversation about that. And I remember the first time I said this, because I started tearing up after they started to cry. And I said, I don't know you very well, but I guarantee you this. I guarantee you that I care enough about you to make sure that you stay alive today and tomorrow. I said, that's all I know. And I'm going to do what I can to help you get there. And they needed to feel like I cared. And I did, obviously, genuinely care, but they needed to hear that. So you have to portray that caring, that empathetic side of you that is basically saying, I don't know what you're going through, and I may never understand it, but I'm going to help you get through it. And I'm going to help you. I want to understand it, and I'm going to help you try to understand it as well, right? You don't label them. You don't talk about mental illness. Well, sounds like you have depression, or sounds like, you're experiencing bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. Well, it doesn't, frankly, it doesn't matter if they are or they aren't. And that's not for us to make that judgment. That's not for us to be therapists and say, well, you have all the symptoms of depression, so you're probably just depressed. What I would suggest doing is going for a walk, right? That's not our job. That's not what we're there to do. We're there to focus on, how do we get through this, right? How do we get through this? Because I want you to be healthy. I want you to feel better. Most importantly, I want you to feel better. And B, I want you to come here and be excited for what we do. I want you to come here and be a part of this. I don't want you to dread coming into my office. I don't want you to dread coming into work because other people might be, laughing or they might be judging you, or you even think they're judging you. So oftentimes I like to use these types of questions. What do you think will help? What do you need in this situation? How can I help? I want to help in any way I can, and all I want to focus on is how to get you healthy. That's all I care about. I don't care about the bottom line. I don't care about, paying you sick days. Ultimately, yes, this is a business and we need to make money, but what is this business if you're not here, right? What is this business if you're not alive tomorrow to do this? What is this business if you have to take 6 weeks off because of the stress that you're under, right? Most people, and it's funny because work is the way that we get through life, right? It's the way that we support ourselves, we support our families. But at the same time, most people are very clear that work is the most stressful part of their life. Very clear. So how do we change that, right? Or how do we engage in conversation that's going to make work maybe the one of the less stressful things in our lives, right? How do we do that? And that's part of these kind of inclusive environments and creating this culture. I'm still a coach. I coach here at the college as a varsity coach, assistant coach, and we're literally just going through a creation of our core values, is what that means as a team. What does it mean for us as coaches? How do we create this kind of framework that we know that our athletes can thrive in? And that's very same to a workplace, because a workplace is no different than a team, right? How do you create this environment where everybody can be successful? Here's the framework. And we've created this framework around what we know each person needs to be successful. So what do? Right? We make sure that people don't talk about other employees, judge their stress days or their days off, right? Their sick days. Well, that person hasn't been here all week and I've been doing twice the work because they haven't been coming in. Well, you know what? You don't really know exactly what's going on. So maybe before you make that judgment, maybe it's time to say, well, maybe it's something that we know nothing about. Maybe we don't understand, and maybe they just need a break. Maybe they just need a break, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Talk about the things that that you value about them. Talk about the things that they bring to the company, right? Talk about the things that what am I trying to say? Compliment them, I guess is the best way to say it, right? Everybody loves to be complimented. Think about the last compliment you received when somebody told you, you did a great job. That was so cool. Or, I loved how you dealt with that situation. Or, that email that you wrote, it was perfectly worded. That was awesome. Small little compliments, right? The things that you do well. Talk about the things that they do well, right? Talk about the things that they bring to the table on a day-to-day basis that you're excited for them to continue to offer. And then empathize. And empathy is something that we can all do better with. And obviously it's going to, it takes a lot of practice, but take the time to try to understand maybe why their performance isn't what it used to be. And the last thing you want to do is force them to talk if they're not ready to talk. Force them to discuss maybe what is actually wrong if they're not ready to discuss what is actually wrong. You don't want to force conversation if somebody's not ready for it, because our brain works in a matter where it's constantly protecting us in some ways. Our bodies, our body and our brain work in survival mode. Its goal is longevity. How do we get by? How do we survive? Literally, how do we survive? That's how it works. So if your brain is not ready to release information, it's hiding it for a reason, because it knows that possibly letting it out is going to cause more trauma. It's going to cause more damage than help. So we have to be conscious of that and not push for information that they're not ready to share. Not push to get details, not push to give advice, right? We're humans. Our nature is to try and fix things, right? Our nature is to try and be a solution to somebody's problems, because we naturally want people to feel better. Because if we care about somebody, the last thing we want to do is see them suffer, right? The last thing we want them to do is to know they're having a bad day. So we constantly are trying to fix things. But in reality, that's the worst thing we can do. We don't want to fix it. We just want to help. And if they're experiencing certain challenges related to maybe stamina or, concentrating or staying organized or dealing with changes, or, they can't handle their emotions. You're finding that maybe they're very emotional. They're either on edge or they're very much just kind of, their senses, their emotions are dulled a little bit. Maybe they're having problems with memory. Well, then you can start to talk about some of the accommodations you can offer. Here are some of the things that we can do to help the situation, or to help you work through the situation, or to give you a little bit of a break so that you don't have to focus so much on that. And maybe we can focus more on the things that we need to do to get you healthy, right? So what are the things that I can do as your employer, as your boss, as your manager? What are the things that I can do to make your job a little bit easier so we can get you healthy, or at least even to start thinking about getting you healthy? So there are things we can do. We just have to be willing to try. And then when we're in these situations, we also have to remember that I was giving a presentation to a group last week, and I have another one coming with the same group this week, and it was to a group of healthcare providers. And the conversation quickly turned into, you need to give yourselves a break. And that's where I'm going with this. As employees, employers, managers, you need to give yourself a break, myself included. We need to give ourselves a break. We need to be able to say, you know what, we got to take care of ourselves here, right? And I was saying this to these healthcare providers, your job is to take care of people on a daily basis. And I said, you need to realize that your job is a heck of a lot more stressful than you're giving yourself credit for right now. And you need to take a step back and acknowledge that, damn, this is hard. This is hard, and that's okay. It's okay that it's hard, but this is tough right now. And I need to figure out how to get through this. And what that means for me, that I have to do a little bit of self-care. I need to take care of myself, because if I don't take care of myself, I'm not going to be a good colleague. I'm not going to be a good healthcare provider. I'm not going to be a good manager, because as soon as I stop taking care of myself, I bring all my stress and I let it out on you, right? If I'm not managing my own emotion, when times are tough in my work day, it's going to come out on you. And what does that do? That just makes your job worse. That makes your life more challenging, more stressful. And as a manager, it starts at the top and works its way down, right? So you have to take care of yourself. And this is very much something that we, and I'm going to bring up the coaching avenue again, because it's no different. As a coach, my job is to make somebody better, is to help somebody get better, to show them how to get better, to teach them how to get better, to help them be the best version of themselves. And in the workplace should be no different. So in order for me to create this environment where my athletes or my team is going to thrive, I have to take care of myself first. I need to make sure I'm eating regularly. I need to make sure I'm drinking water or fluid, getting something in my body regularly throughout the day. I need to make sure that I'm communicating and debriefing with people that I know I can trust. You know, my dad, I'll never forget this. He taught me when I was really young, you can count your true friends on one hand, meaning that you really only have 5 people in your life that you could truly be open, honest, vulnerable with and debrief with on a regular basis without any judgment. And those 5 people are the people you need to latch on to. Those 5 people are the ones that you need to be able to call and say, you know, I had a tough day. Do you mind chatting about it for a few minutes? Or, you know, with your partner or spouse at home, and expressing that, you know what, this is really challenging. Acknowledging your own feelings, acknowledging your own emotions and saying, this, you know, I don't know how to deal with this situation. Do you have any advice or suggestions? And then taking care of yourself to make sure you get the proper amount of rest. If your body is not recovering, if your body is not, if you're not getting proper nutrition, proper rest, proper exercise, then your body is not going to be chemically imbalanced. And if you're chemically out of balance, then you're going to act out of balance, right? Think about it like, you know, electrical wiring circuit, socket, something like that, where the wires have to be connected specifically, red to red, green to green, blue to blue. Well, imagine taking the red and connecting it to the blue, right? So it's very similar. You're not going to be able to turn the light switch on or something like that. Well, our bodies work the same way. As soon as you throw off that balance, you're going to get different responses. It's like, and this is an analogy that Jill taught me years ago. It's like a GPS system, very much, where you ever plug an address into a GPS and you end up somewhere completely that you weren't designed to be or supposed to go, or you end up at a dead end. Well, that's how our brain works when it's not getting what it needs, right? So we need to think about, are we taking care of ourselves? Exercise. So underestimated. We hear that, you know, you should exercise 3 to 5 times a week, and exercise is 15 to 20 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity. You know, all these guidelines that get put out, but just get outside and move. You know what? Get up and go for a walk. You know what? I know it's snowing. I'm in a room surrounded with windows right now, so I can see the accumulation of blowing snow that is basically filling the Mohawk parking lot right now. But getting outside and breathing that fresh air for literally 30 seconds is going to add new perspective, right? Create an environment where you can be vulnerable that allows your employees to be vulnerable as well. Create an environment where you can be vulnerable that allows your employees to be vulnerable as well. And remember that every day is different. Every day is different. Have you ever woken up and for no reason at all, you're in the best mood that you've ever been in, for no reason at all, and then the next day you wake up and it's the worst day it's ever been? I mean, your emotions are going to change day to day. They're going to fluctuate according to what's happening in the world, according to what's happening at home, according to what's happening, you know, in your neighborhood, according to what's happening in your family. All of these things are going to impact your mood, and that's okay. And that's okay. Create that open, honest environment where you can come into work, or maybe one day you do come into work and say, you know what, I'm just going to preface this day with, I didn't sleep last night and I'm really sorry. So if I do happen to snap at you, it's not because I'm mad or angry. It's literally just because I had the worst night's sleep ever. Or, you know what, I've actually walked into a class teaching a lecture before and said, I'm just going to be honest with everybody right now. You know, I had a really bad day yesterday. I'm not really focused and I'm not feeling great. So I apologize if you receive some of that, you know, some of that emotion or negativity, right? Because the ultimate goal that we want to do as people is survive. And in order to survive, we need to create resilience. And resilience is something that we can all have as individuals, but it's something that we also need other people to build. You can be resilient on your own, but you can be even stronger with the support of others. You can be even stronger by allowing people to be a part of your bubble, to be a part of your armor, right? That armor that we wear to be resilient, to make things bounce off of us, to absorb things and understand things and process things, but to allow them to not to overly affect us. And in order to do that, we have to realize that we don't have control over everything, right? And taking care of ourselves is understanding that I can't control everything. And the things that I can't control, that's okay, but I can control how I react and respond to that. I can control how I interact with the people after that happens. I can't control the workplace. I can't control the amount of stress that a certain thing, might bring me, but I can control how I process that emotion and what I do with that. And change is something that we're constantly dealing with, especially now on a day-to-day basis. And as much as we would like it, if we knew exactly what we are walking into every minute of every day, it's not realistic. So give yourself a break and allow yourself to have a bad day or have a bad moment, right? Allow yourself to be emotional. Allow yourself to be vulnerable. And you aren't, nobody is invincible. And I made the mistake of thinking I used to be invincible as well. So learn how to process emotion, process that emotion, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's okay to not be invincible. It's okay to let things impact you. And again, you can't control that sometimes, but you can control how you respond. So the take home message here, I think, would be to focus on what's strong rather than what's wrong. Try not to worry about fixing what's wrong. Look for what's right and start to build on that, right? Start to build on people's strengths. Start to build on people's values, right? Try to start to understand why people are doing what they're doing. What is the passion behind it? What's the reason why you're here, right? Ultimately, what it comes down to is if we can focus on not allowing, what am I trying to say? If we can focus on not allowing judgment to cloud our brain, not allowing judgment to determine our decisions or our choices or our actions, that's going to make our workplace a much more comfortable place to be, a much more inclusive place to be. That being said, there's so much information out there on the mental health in the workplace and different different programs and things to do and not to do and things like that. And every business is different. And on Friday, I know Ryan's going to bring it up as well. We're going to talk about mental health first aid and how that can be something that it could be a part of your annual plan, and having people constantly be brushing up on those types of skills. One of the worst things that we do, I think, in my personal opinion, at the workplace, is we have these one-off training sessions where you go in and you learn about how to be a better team. And then after, that day of that PD day, professional development day, is over, nobody brings it up again. And then 365 days later, you have another team building session. Well, what happened to the other 364 days? So in order to make your workplace emotionally wealthy, in order to make your workplace emotionally healthy, it's a 365-day-a-year process. And it's not something that's a light switch that you're going to be able to turn on and off. It's not something that's automatically going to be on tomorrow and we're going to have this great workplace, this great working environment. So it's a matter of time. And that being said, thank you everybody for tuning in today. I know Ryan's going to jump on and I think he has some questions that he's going to be ready to ask. As always, please never hesitate to reach out to Jill and I. We enjoy doing these things, so we're happy to answer questions or be involved in your workplace in any way we can. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Nick. Really interesting. I'm sitting here in Jill's presentation, Nick, and yours, and I'm thinking to myself as before this role as a business leader, there's so many things that I could have done differently, and I think eventually I did. But even then, I'm like, wow, we would have done that. You mentioned training. We used to spend one day a year intensive on mental health training, and then we just assumed we fix everyone's problems and we went away. And it's something that I really appreciate what you said there. I appreciate the fact that it has to be a constant. I'll add 2 points and then I'd love to so we've got 4 or 5 questions here that I'd love to ask. One of the other things that you brought up was, having these ongoing conversations. I think back to when we used to do performance reviews, and, what is it now? 70% of high school students have test anxiety because that's what we decide whether or not they're smart or not. And as employers, we would often go and do performance reviews on employees, and that would be their judgment day. That would be their day that they walked home thinking, am I doing well? Am I not doing well? And so what we quickly changed to was 2 things. Number one, we had performance discussions where they actually were able to come to us and said, I feel right enough right now to be doing my job, and then we would evaluate their performance. So really was that 2-way conversation. The other thing that we did is we had a great challenge, and I went to our 11 managers at the time, and I said, your challenge is to know one thing every week about your employee that has nothing to do with work. whether that be their children, where they're from, their favorite football team, whatever it was. And we really tried to break down that barrier between employee 1, 2, 3, 4 and John or Joan Smith. And we really tried to break those things down. We found once we did that, the performance conversations were a lot easier to have after that, because we now were dealing with a human being who we understood a little bit more, and not just the employee. Just something for us to think about. The other thing I was really excited about that Jill talked about was a concept of presenteeism. This was a concept that was explained to me a few years ago, and it's one that I'm always diving into. And it's interesting, Jill, that my definition of presenteeism as a business owner was the impact on productivity. Your presenteeism from your side was not that at all. And so we used to take a look at that and go and say, well, if Nick is on my team and Nick shows up to work every day because he's an hourly employee and he's got rent to pay, that actually is costing me money because of the person's performance. And I love the fact that you posed that in a different way, didn't you? You didn't just pose that to go and say, this is the impact on the company performance, but really the whys. And I'm wondering if you could sort of extend that a little bit for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I think we forget about is that often, a job is so many more things to people than just a job, right? It's their livelihood. It's the way that, like you said, they pay their rent. But for a lot of people, it's also their identity, right? I'm a social worker. I'm a teacher. I'm this. I'm that. That's how we define ourselves. So often, what you'll find is people really struggle with, I have to be there, right? I have to be present. And it really, when you think about it, doesn't, one, do anybody any good, the individual, because we think about it this way. If you have the flu, especially now, right, we say stay home. We don't want you coming to work when you're sick, but we don't think of it in the same way, because again, we make that division between mental illness and physical illness, and we shouldn't. We really should be looking at it as all as one, right? If I am not feeling well, I shouldn't be going to work. I should be giving my brain, my body, whatever it needs, that time to rest, so that when I am at work, I'm doing the best of my ability. I'm supporting my colleagues and my staff. And that, because what happens with presenteeism too is it breeds animosity, because it's like, oh my gosh, they're there, but they're not doing their job, so I have to pick up the slack. And instead of understanding what somebody is going through. So that it's a really complex term, actually.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting when you mention, I talked very briefly about the stigma in the workplace, and often we would look at people that were slackers and not working very hard, and they were the biggest presenteeism offenders in my brain. That would breed a poison work environment, much like we had mentioned earlier on. We really didn't check until later on to go and say, well, there's reasons why they may not be feeling that way. I mean, there are poor employees, but there are reasons why that was the case. And that to me breeds that stigma that we're all trying to work on, doesn't it? The fact that person is, we look at that person as being a bad employee. They just might be dealing with things that we don't know about. And that's, I know from my experience, that challenge of our managers to find out one or two things about each employee really helped. But Jill, at the same time, I think employers need to do better with that to, ask the whys and understand, not just make assumptions too, don't they?
And I think it goes back to that thought about taking the time to get to know your employees. And obviously in certain situations, certain companies, that's really, really hard to do, right? Because there's massive a number of people. But when people feel valued in whatever way, shape, or form, they're more likely when they do come to work, if they do need to seek out help, they're more willing to do that. They're more willing to take 5 minutes and say, like as Nick said, before a presentation, if he's having an off day, I'm not having a good day today. But we, for some reason, attach shame to that or weakness to that. And when you think about it, nobody is on 24/7 every single day. They're just not. But we just assume that in the workplace you're supposed to be, and it's not realistic to think that.
It's a great point. And again, as much as this is interesting to me, I'm also look back on my career and do my own evaluation too, Joe, to go and say, wow, what as business leader, I could have done this better. Or in some cases, I'm really glad I did this, because it's, one of the hard things as a business leader is to also give your own time for personal reflection too, to understand that, the things that we couldn't have done better, have done worse. So I appreciate that. We do have 3 or 4 questions that I'd love, Jill, for you and Nick to answer if you could. And the first one I thought is very interesting. Do you both find the difference in gender when it comes to workplace issues with mental health? Do you see an issue right now with gender divide? Are there more issues among female workers or male workers? And last, is there a difference in how you sort of initiate those conversations?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that we're seeing a change, which is good. We're seeing much more attention paid to men's mental health, and to the idea of talking about men's mental health. And Nick has done a fantastic job to actually kind of help us with that. But I think what happens is we expect it's still those old stigmas, right? Women behave a certain way when they're upset, men behave a certain way, and men aren't supposed to talk about it, but women do. So there's still those underlying kind of ripples in a lot of different places. Some workplaces are much better at it than others. And I think it becomes allowing people to talk about their mental health. It doesn't matter how they identify themselves. It's allowing those conversations to happen. And then those conversations aren't based on gender. They're based on a person's experience. And when we attach gender to it, then again, we get these old stereotypes, we get these old kind of thought processes, and we really need to just normalize the conversation across the board.
Interesting. And again, speaking personal experience as a man running a business, Nick, I would have loved to shut my door once in a while and cried. I'll be very honest with you. But that would show weakness. And sometimes as a business owner, whether male or female, you're not supposed to show that weakness. And I think that's a difficult thing for leaders. And I would imagine employees too, when they don't have somewhere to shut their door, they don't have an office to sort of hide. And they're sort of always on display in a lot of ways too, isn't it? Another question that came to us here, do you have examples of some innovative ways, some great techniques that businesses have had to help with mental health in the workplace?
Yeah, there's actually been a couple. So one is having people in to talk about it. I think is a big one. Starting that conversation. I worked with a company in Hamilton, small company, but does really incredible work, but it's a trade program that I was in. So it was mostly, people were out in the field most of the time. So we started with a small group of managers and supervisors, but then extended that conversation afterwards to all employees. So it wasn't a conversation that was just happening behind the scenes. It was, and the employees really appreciated that their managers and supervisors took the time to learn and then brought the conversation to them. And it really opened up a lot of doors and avenues just to have that conversation. I also know of another company that in their wellness, so you know how a lot of benefit packages have like $500 for massage or $500 for physio. Well, this one was, you put money into your wellness package. So that could be, maybe you wanted therapy. Maybe you needed to buy new running shoes. You could use that money for whatever you deemed as part of your wellness plan. And I thought that was really innovative.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll throw one in there that I remember a very good friend of mine. He had a company, right on Bloor Street, Yonge and Bloor in Toronto, and I went one night to meet him to go to a Leafs game, and he says, "Well, just wait in here." And so I walked in, and there was this massive playground in the middle of the office. I remember thinking to myself, what is this? And there were foosball tables and pools tables, and there was a rock climbing course. And I thought, am I somewhere I shouldn't be? He said, "No, that's for our recess." And he was very serious about it. And he went and he said that for 20 minutes every morning, 20 minutes every afternoon, teens will go in there and they'll actually have recess and they'll play those games. And Nick, they'll get that, they'll get those, they'll get that exercise. And that was something that was so foreign to me, but it really made some sense. I know in my past life, we used to do walking meetings. So Nick, we get out in the back of the trails and we do walking meetings, and that made a big impact as well. So I guess we're trying, but we've still got many directions to go. So a question that came up yesterday that I promised to ask of the two of you: what is the one thing that you think business leaders can do to impact mental health in the workplace?
Nick, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I think the simple answer is to do more of these things that we're doing right now. I mean, Jill already mentioned, having people in to talk about it. I mean, that needs to be something that is done on a regular basis, right? Where you have, whether it be a speaker series or just providing constant, not even constant, but properly timed mental health related activities, events, and so that it's a year-round type thing. Maybe it's every 2 weeks or every week, or depending on obviously the business what's appropriate. But the leaders need to be engaged in it. And I think one of the things that I noticed over my time, especially as a mental health first aid instructor, is when I go in to offer mental health first aid in a workplace, for example, the managers are never there, and they intend to be there, but they're too busy. And so the leadership in that type of thing has to start at the top. You want to create an environment where, mental health is something that's, we're having a lockdown drill right here, just so you know. That's what the beeping is in the background.
Me too.
So that being said, the managers are never involved. So it's like the managers need to be the first ones trained, and they need to have that, because you get a little certificate at the end of the course. That needs to be on their door or their window, right? That needs to be there for employees to see that they took the course, so that now they're going to be encouraged to go as well. I mean, I think that's the first step, is getting that training, getting that knowledge and that education to say, I've done it. So because I'm doing it, that's why you should be doing it too. And in most cases, that's not happening. And I, being in a few different workplaces, that's probably the biggest piece of that's the biggest complaint from the employees is, I want, and it's optional for the employees, and they want to do it. They want to be there, but then the end of it, and during conversation, it comes up every time. But why isn't my manager here? And why isn't their manager here? And why aren't they getting the training too? Because it's just, if not more valuable for them at that level to kind of breed this environment of inclusiveness, right? Or this environment of it's okay not to be okay. It has to start at the top.
It's interesting, Nick, and first off, I'll commend you for your focus because we've got the same alarm on the other side of campus right now too. But I guess along with a couple things, one of the things that I was experimenting with, there's a company in the States that actually took away titles of their leaders, and they no longer called them managers. They no longer call them directors, vice presidents, et cetera, et cetera. Nick, they actually call them coaches, and they call them team coaches, and it's something that you and I both have a coaching background that I really bought into, because I don't think I think there's a lot of symmetry right there between being a coach and being a leader. They wouldn't let anyone have any titles rather than assistant coach, team coach, head coach, which I thought was interesting. And the other thing that many organizations are doing right now is they're actually limiting the amount of people that leaders have report to them. So the optimal number is about 6, we're saying these days. Many companies, to save on costs, will have 12, will have 14, and that really eliminates that chance to get to know your employees on a level that you really can help them as the person and not really the employees. I know that we've sort of seen those as well. So so I'm going to, for the sake of the alarm bells ringing in my head, figuratively now and literally, I'm going to end the session. Jill, Nick, I really appreciate the time that you've taken today. I know we have a lot of interest in not just the live, but the recording of this session to send to some of our partners in the community. So I'm excited for the impact that we can have on them. And most importantly, appreciate your time, everybody in our audience, and moving forward with our recordings. And appreciate the fact that we can continue the discussion too. I invite us to join again on Friday when we actually talk about a program that I know personally I'm very excited to learn more about and promote within our college and our workplace with mental health first aid too. So thanks everybody, and we'll talk to you on Friday.